Hello and welcome to another episode of Spar Talk. Today I'm joined by Comrade Mauro from Lega Trotskista d'Italia, which is the name of our group in Italy. Welcome to the show, Comrade.
Hi, everyone.
So Italy has been in the news, especially in the left news, for the large strikes that have recently occurred in defense of Palestine. I know from my experience on social media, I've seen a lot of things that have been talking about Italian workers shutting down the country for Palestine. And you have just published a leaflet talking about these events. And in it, you note that nearly 1 million people turned out for these demonstrations. So for me, I would like to talk about these things and just what's happening in Italy, because obviously I think the events that are taking place in Italy right now, the recent strikes, for example, this is fantastic news. You know, something like this, huge strikes, they were urgently needed now almost for 2 years. So I'd like to get into this and ask you to open by just talking about what is the situation with the strikes? How have they been? What's next? What's the mood like? Just take it away, because I think for most of our listeners, including myself, we don't know so much about Italy and what's happening, really. So please educate us on what's happening.
Yeah, I'd say that the immediate spark for the events was the Sumud Flotilla and its approaching to Palestine's waters. And actually tonight, this very moment, it's been attacked by Israeli forces. So the most likely thing is that there is going to be a general strike on Friday called by one of the largest union and one of the smaller leftist union called CGAL and USB. And this strike will be significant, quite possibly larger than the one on the 22nd that you mentioned in the beginning. But the flotilla was in fact the spark, but I think it collected frustration and resentment against the government and against Israel that has been over for 2 years, because people were frustrated that the Palestine movement wasn't going anywhere, that the genocide with all its horrors was getting worse and worse. And most of the left, the liberals and the reformist left in Italy was not moving a finger really, and initially was actually supporting Israel. When the flotilla started, people were were collecting money and food and rice and beans to send to the poor Palestinians people, and they really wanted these things to arrive there. And these, for 2 years and more, there were a little group of workers in the ports, particularly in the port of Genova, who constantly kept acting to prevent shipments of weapons to Israel.
This is a COBAS unions we're talking about, yes?
Yeah, it's called the CALP, an autonomous collective at the port of Genova, maybe 25, 30 people, and similar smaller groups in other ports who were never able to call strikes, but organize actions outside. And their inability was both because they are small unions and because the largest unions did not want to act against Israel. Until recently in August, when things changed a little bit, and I think it was a combination of pressure from below, from people being horrified by the genocide and wanted to act when nobody was doing anything in the world. And on the other side, also there was a bit of an opening from above, as the liberals who had been supporting Genocide Joe were trying to get some distance from Trump, and so they started donning the keffiyeh and doing some noise about Palestine, and this actually made it more respectable for a lot of people who had been blocked by the liberals to become active for Palestine. So there was a convergence of these two phenomena, I think, that led to the current situation.
Interesting. And the strikes that happened on the 22nd, what's your opinion of them? What was it like on the ground? Do you think they've been successful? Is the mood and momentum still there?
Yeah. Momentum has been growing for 2 weeks now, and the strike on the 22nd was also preceded by another strike called by the largest union, CGAL, that wanted on one side to prevent kind of a hemorrhage from its ranks to the USB, who was seen as the most militant and active on Palestine. And at the same time, they called a strike that was trying to deflate a little bit the USB strike. So these two separate strikes were seen, rightly so, by many people in the CGAL and amongst workers as not a betrayal, but a half sabotage by the main union. And so there was a push to have a common strike when the flotilla was going to be stopped, which is now. And so, in fact, there's going to be both unions, the largest union and the USB union called for a common strike on the 3rd of September tonight. There are still two other very large unions in Italy, the Catholic and the formerly Socialist Party Union, who are more supportive of the government and did not strike and are not striking this time yet. So these divisions amongst unions and in the working class are very deep and really a huge obstacle to a unified action against Meloni's government and Israel in this moment.
Okay. So I think in what you said, I have at least two questions to help make sense of the bigger picture. I think one is obviously what you just said in terms of sort of the divisions between Italian workers and the fight for Palestine, which is something you talk about in your leaflet. So could you also just tell us the Italian name of the leaflet?
The title is Saldare il movimento per la Palestina alle lotte operaie, which means welding the Palestine movement to working class struggles.
Exactly.
Which
is really, speaking from experience in some of the Anglophone countries, that's really been missing, really welding the needs of domestic workers with a cause which many see, oh, well, that's far away. Why should I care for that when my livelihood here is being destroyed and my union is not really doing much about it, right? So that is a problem that we see in many countries. I think that's one. Two, when you mentioned, the convergence that allowed this strike to take place, or these events to unfold. You speak about the liberals, but we know, of course, that Meloni is in charge in Italy and she's got very pernicious right-wing views and so on. So we can do this turn by turn. I think maybe first putting this whole situation in the context of the government and what is the more broadly political situation in Italy with the Meloni government.
Meloni came into government by the end of 2022. And it was not the first right-wing government in Italy. There was a previous one, not so different, in 2019, headed by the Northern League at that time. And both were the product of the huge sufferings that the globalization and the United European Union meant for working people and minorities in Italy, especially after the 2008 crisis, which sent high unemployment skyrocketing, especially amongst the youth, and generally a decrease of wages that was significant, building on a situation where the working class has been stagnating in terms of real wages and living conditions since the early 90s. So people after 2008 were looking for alternatives to the liberal right-wing and left-wing parties that had governed between 1991 and 2008. And they looked to different populist solutions, including the right wing of the Northern League. One example that I could make is that in 2012, after the financial crisis, a technocratic government supported by the Democratic Party and the left introduced a retirement age of 67 and more. And the Northern League, in its electoral program, mitigated it to a combination of years that was a bit less, like 63 or 64. And this pushed many, many workers to vote for the Northern League just because it meant either you retire in 2 years or you will die on your own job.
Wow. So the right wing actually had more, quote, pro-worker.
Well, yeah, in that case,
position
very
in
much
this
so.
Case.
And similar positions, especially, and then the Meloni also was the only part. Meloni's party was the only that was not in a national unity government during the lockdowns, which in Italy were very early and very hard.
Yes.
And she did not oppose the lockdowns in themselves, but not being part of the government, she was able to criticize, the worst outcomes of those. This was definitely a factor in her personal victory in the elections in 2022. So this overall, right-wing trend that we are seeing throughout the world was a bit before in Italy, and combined also with the effects of the lockdowns and how the left supported them big time.
Yeah. So we have a situation where, I guess, sizable layers of working people turn to Meloni. Yes.
Yeah.
And then, as you were saying earlier, you have, of course, there is huge grievances and anger about Palestine and the genocide and so on. So it seems to me like what you're describing, if I understand correctly, is that there's a pro-Palestine movement, and then there's, I guess, pro-Meloni working class, and there's a gap. Would that be correct?
It's correct generally. Of course, there are overlaps and it's not black and white, but for sure
of
that's
course.
What we have seen, for instance, with the strike on the 22nd. Okay, 1 million people went on strike, but the majority of the workers did not, especially in the industry. And the main objection that you can find on building for the strike is that people come to you and say, or you're now striking for Palestine, but as a union, you did not move a finger for me when the pensions were cut or when austerity was imposed or for healthcare. And so why should we strike for Palestine, which is... and that's Meloni's theme was, let's put Italian first. And that's the way the workers translate it into their own terms. Italians before Palestinians. And that's a big obstacle. And the way to, actually, because the left reacts mostly in a moralistic fashion by telling people, well, if you think like that, you are then complicit in a genocide that's happening far away, but it's an horrible thing. And that further divides the left from the workers who know perfectly well they're not complicit in a genocide. They are oppressed and exploited by the same bosses that are supporting the genocide. While what we need to really do is to show the workers that they have a concrete interest in supporting strikes and defending Palestine. Then that's an effort that you have to do, place by place, industry by industry, because as an abstraction, everybody can agree on that. But then there are concrete things that people understand quite well.
Yes, for sure.
These objections that the unions have done nothing for me and now are striking for Palestine cannot be overcome just by propaganda or by us telling this to workers. There needs to be concrete facts that the unions must really struggle for their interests. But that's what we need to do as socialists: combine the struggle for Palestine and the struggle for the working class concretely.
Yeah, I think that's a really thoughtful point. And again, something we see definitely here in Britain, but in other countries as well. Out of curiosity, the trade union leaders of these Italian unions, some of the more left-wing ones, like what has been their approach, or how they've been posturing in this situation where they're striking for Palestine, but they face, I guess, memberships that are asking them questions about, well, what about pensions, jobs, etc.? How do they deal with this?
Yeah, we must describe differently the COBAs from the main unions, because the COBAs exist as an expression of frustration of workers with the main trade union leadership, basically supporting capitalism for 30 years. So these are workers who have been in the main unions, who have struggled inside them to change things, but have come nowhere and have been thrown out or have walked out themselves because they couldn't see a possibility there. And they have built a smaller union, which is much more militant. That's a big difference, because the COBAS union have been very active supporting Palestine throughout and since the beginning of this new genocide, while the others have been more directly linked to the Democratic Party. And especially in the first year of the genocide in Gaza, have been very, very reluctant to oppose, the equation that if you support Palestine, you're an anti-Semite. And so there was a huge difference in that. And now they are both supporting Palestine to a degree. What I think is common between these two trends, considering this difference, is that eventually they both think that the solution to the Palestine oppression or to the crisis for the workers in Italy lies in the hands of the powers that be, meaning the Italian government, the EU, the UN, NATO, whoever. And so their struggle is mostly aimed to touch the heart of politicians and push them to really do something for Palestine. They may not believe this. Actually, most of them do not really believe this, but they don't see any other way. And so...
yeah, this is a strategy.
Yeah, the strategy leads there. And whenever there is a little move by, say, the Pope or any other peace force, they jump on it and...
the Italian union leaders like it when the Pope says nice things.
Actually, I'm sorry to say this because it sounds the leader of these port workers in Genova, the Calp, who is really a heroic kind of character. He's been struggling like crazy for 2 years and more to stop weapons to Gaza. Made a point of pride because he was invited twice from the previous Pope, who was a pacifist, quotation marks, and they exchanged books and things because, of course, the church in Italy is a big factor and a big obstacle to mobilizing the working class against imperialist wars because they have this pacifist rhetoric and they sometimes can do these things, invite militant pacifist workers. But if you to promote the church as a factor for peace in a country like Italy is really building an enormous obstacle to the working class taking action in its own interest and independently. So that's kind of an example, but it's why.
I never thought about this. This is the first time I'm realizing that the role of the church in Italy, especially in a country like Italy with the Vatican and the Pope and so on. Okay, so that's useful to understand what the union leaders are doing. Just a point of clarification, the Democratic Party, that's the main opposition party to Meloni?
Yeah, it is.
Okay. So in the leaflet, you talk about how following the strike, Meloni first unleashed a huge wave of repression against the protesters and strikers, but then seemed to have backed off because it wasn't really working. And now what we see, I think just yesterday I was reading Trump's Gaza plan, right, with Blair, the war criminal, and other horrible people who are going to now take charge of Gaza and rebuilding Gaza or whatever. So it seems to me like that also played a role in terms of Meloni's dealing with what's happening on the ground right now. Could you maybe explain a little bit of how Meloni's shifting in terms of going from repression now to saying maybe Italy will recognize a rump Palestinian state?
Yeah, well, Meloni is the product of the same process that led Trump into power, of course, in a different country and in a country that's more dependent on the US than it is independent. But since she's been in power, she has been trying to undermine in her own way the globalized liberal order, but at the same time supporting the mainstays of the EU centrist and liberal governments because she can't do otherwise because Italy is completely indebted to the French and German banks and to the US. So there is no way that until there is a, say, liberal centrist majority in Europe, Meloni can just go her own way. For instance, she fully supported the arming of Ukraine and the stance of the EU in Ukraine since the get-go. She's been adamant in doing that. But at the same time, she's been trying to side with Trump, for instance, in the UN, blocking the usual motions supportive of Palestine that leads to nothing, but she was opposed to that. Now I think there is, as you said, a combination of she playing alongside Trump's plan for Palestine, but also the strikes really gave a little shock to the government, and we can see this, I think, clearly in one aspect. There was another strike, a half-baked strike by the main unions last year against the financial bill that was passed by Meloni. And the government used heavily the anti-strike laws in transport against that strike, and the unions accepted it completely. While in this case, they never mentioned the anti-strike laws, which is kind of a different attitude they have, because I think they fear that there is a potential for strike actions and anti-government movement taking up.
You talk about how now there is this building of momentum for Palestine, right? And it's excellent news that there's been now a general strike called. We'll see what happens to it, how. I think what's really crucial is how is it built? I know it's in a couple of days, but it's really crucial that the workers from key industries come out and really shut the country down. But so you have the building of this momentum, which is in theory good for the workers' movement in general in Italy, but also I think in Europe and internationally. What are the obstacles to this? What do you see as, obviously, so we're trying to intervene, right? This is the purpose of your leaflet. What do you see as the challenges for carrying this momentum through and leading it to strengthening the movement for Palestine and for the Italian workers?
There are a few, actually, unfortunately. One, we mentioned it already before, it's the distance between the working class and the unions and the left. The unions are still strong in Italy. Numerically, they are not weak, but they are quite toothless, or they have been quite toothless for a few years because of their leadership line of social partnership, I'll translate, which since 1991 has meant accepting all of the huge setbacks for the working class, privatizations, you name them. And so this distance is still very strong and has been expressed in workplaces by this reluctance to support Palestine, even if many workers, including workers who voted for the right wing, are obviously horrified by the genocide in Gaza, who like it to stop, but they don't see really the left as a possible solution or a workforce to follow. So this is an obstacle that must be overcome in two ways. One, as I said, is to show the workers that it's in their real interest to do that. And one aspect that everybody understands is that with these rearmament schemes in Europe will mean a huge bloodletting. I'm not sure it's for the working class in terms of cuts to healthcare work. Yeah, this everybody understand. And also there is a quite real fear that our sons will be drafted into wars and armies that seems closer every day. Those two concerns are very strong and felt by people who vote for the right wing or support the liberals. And there has been another example. There has been a struggle for the contract of metal workers, mostly out of factories in Italy, an industry that has been severely hit by both the Green Deal schemes of the EU for the last couple of years and by the breakup into the commercial links through the tariffs and measures of the US governments against China. So this crisis is quite clearly connected to the overthrow of the liberal globalized order by Trump, and opposition to this breakup is a key component if workers want to defend their possibility to have a job and contract in the auto industry. So this is one side. The other side is that in order to really win the heart of these workers who are voted for the right wing, we need to reject and dump the liberals, who appear as the everything they hate. You say, ideally and morally, people who thinks they are better than them, but and preach high moral ideas, but have been instrumental in keeping them down for a long time. So a combination of breaking really with these liberals, which is something the left never wants to do, and motivating the workers in defending Palestine as in their own interest is quite crucial to go ahead.
Yeah.
And that's one. Other two things that comes to my mind. One is the moralism that especially the more leftist elements use when dealing with more backward workers or workers generally who don't mobilize, to treat them like sheep who are complicit with the genocide. And that's really terrible, because to say, especially the workers in the lower ranks of the working class who do the most horrible and low-paid jobs, that they are complicit in the genocide by being oppressed and exploited, is really a way to reject them.
It's drawing an equal sign between them and the bosses. It's really horrible. Yeah.
And final things is there are really these illusions that things can only be solved eventually by the powers that be, by the capitalists, the states, and the international institutions, is a paralyzing factor, because people always look, even when they are striking or struggling, they look to these forces as the eventual solution, especially, for instance, for blocking arms and imposing an embargo to Israel. there is these contradictions now because people are doing it themselves in the ports. They are blocking weapons and blocking the Zim ships and the Maersk ships, and it's been happening also with oil carriers. And there are talks in the weapons factories, but it's always mixed between should we take it in our own hands and stop it, or should we ask the government to do it? Of course, the government would have a better means to stop weapons than the workers themselves in a way, but it's not going to happen. Or if it's going to happen, it's going to be fake, especially because in Italy, in our leaflet, we mentioned the example of Spain. Because Spain has embargoed weapons to Israel and put in place other measures against the Israeli government, but they have not moved a finger against the largest naval and aerial base in Andalusia, which is controlling the entry to the Mediterranean. And in Italy, this thing is at a larger scale because Italy is a ship carrier for NATO since 1945. It contains dozens of NATO and US bases and nuclear weapons, and one can oppose weapons to Israel, but if you don't want Italy out of NATO and to close these bases, it remains a little bit half fake.
Yes, I understand. I think this sort of brings us to a broader point about what the Spartacists in Italy have to say to the Italian left, and what's our sort of perspective for the Italian left to go forward and the Italian working class to go forward, which I guess what I'm really trying to talk about is Atlanticism, the support to, not breaking with the EU, NATO and all of that. I wonder if you could motivate a little bit more generally what you have to say for the Italian working class and left to rearm itself.
Yeah. Well, since Italy lost World War II, it's been a component part of the American order in a subordinate way. But the Italian bourgeoisie was in a contradictory situation because they had to disarm themselves, having lost the war. But the US didn't want to disarm Italy too much because it was a border post with Yugoslavia and the Soviet world. So it was rebuilt in a way with no denazification at all, and by keeping the old structures that was instrumental to keep Italy as an outpost of NATO in Europe. And the Communist Party was very strong in Italy, and on one side opposed NATO and Christian democratic governments that were the concretization of it in Italy, but at the same time accepted that Italy should be part of the Western world as part of the Yalta Agreement. So its opposition to NATO was always conditional and based on the expectation that there could be a peaceful coexistence between the Soviet Union and the Western world.
Right.
And so they opposed it insofar it was too aggressive and hoping to get harmonic coexistence, which never occurred and could never. So the left was always growingly accepting this dependence on Italy by the US because it was crucial for the preservation of bourgeois order after World War II in the country. And that's been even more so after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, because the Communist Party dissolved itself overnight and transformed itself basically within a few years in the Democratic Party, and it was totally loyal to the globalized order that was increasingly introduced by the United States after 1991. The left supported the creation of the EU as the way forward for the Italian society, but this meant huge privatizations, liberalizations of the previous economic structure, which basically made Italy a stagnant country for 30 years, unlike other countries in Europe that were able to profit more from the opening of the Eastern European markets. And the left supported a series of technocratic government of this Euro bureaucrat. I will name a few of them. Maybe the names don't say anything to you, but Prodi, Monti, and Draghi eventually is more of a star now. Yes. Draghi was there since 91 and is the kind of people that the left supported throughout. So in the name of fighting the right, which was seen by the left as the growing danger in the early 90s.
Can I just ask a question? When you talk about the left, no, it's just I'm very, very ignorant. But when you say the left, who do you have in mind? Are you talking about like the far left groups? Or are you talking about the mainstream left part? Like what passes after the Communist Party? What is the left?
Okay, no, you're right. In fact, I have been mixing up the two
I was just
of
curious.
those. No, that's a good, because there is an overlap. In fact, after the Communist Party was a big party of 1 million or more members. When it broke up, and I won't go into the process, but say after 2008, largest working class parties were wiped away in Italy. The largest one in the 90s was called Rifondazione Comunista, still had 200,000 members or so, but because of its support to this liberal technocratic government, was eventually wiped away in 2007, 2008, and now has maybe 2,000, 3,000 members. So there was a total diaspora of the Communist Party and its fringe groups, and also the Trotskyist movement was always very weak and marginal in Italy, particularly because of the large size of the Communist Party and the fact that the original Trotskyists, the Mandelists or Pabloists in our jargon, are deeply buried in the Communist Party for a long time. Right. So when everything broke up in '69, there were not effects. Come to these days, the left is very fragmented. There are dozens of different groups of different orthodoxies, Maoist, Stalinist, Trotskyist, and whatnot.
The Lotta Comunista it's maybe like its own unique...
Lotta Comunista is quite unique.
Variation.
In the sense that it comes from the Bordiga tradition, but has a very, very opportunist work in the trade unions. They are actually part of the leadership of the main trade union in the town of Genova. They run the port union, and they run the metal workers union in Genova. And as I said, the opposition to armed shipments in Genova has been very strong by a small group of 20, 30 workers. And they have met with total opposition by the CGIL, Lotta Comunista, for 2 years, calling them maximalists and whatnot. Only recently, Lotta Comunista entered into a strike with them in this context that we described at the beginning. But for 2 years, they have not moved a finger. And it poses very orthodox at the last strike on last Friday, while opposing a common strike between USB and CGL workers. They carried the flag, the union that said, more or less, against imperialism, Arab and Israeli workers unite. Right. Okay, and so this slogan attracted a lot of criticism for the wrong reasons by the liberals, who said, how can you equate Arab and Jewish workers, or how can you think Jewish workers are ever doing anything about the genocide? But the fact is that Lotta Comunista, oppose liberation of Palestine on principle, saying it's a reactionary remnant of the past and whatnot. So there is no way they can unite Jewish
That's
and
the
Arab
main
workers.
thing I know about Lotta Comunista, which is that they think there's no more national questions. It's a thing of the past, and it's been resolved historically. So there's no such thing as national struggles, which makes no sense when you look around the world. Imperialist oppression, but also Palestine. I mean, it's the greatest example of a national liberation struggle. But anyway, sorry, I took you down a tangent. But I just wanted to understand what the left meant. But okay, so coming back to. Yes.
So, the left is now very excited, and rightly so, about these events. And we are too very excited about these events because it's a small but concrete opportunity to overcome divisions in the working class and take a step against the government, which has not been happening for 2 years. There has been no really opposition to Meloni since she's been in government. And if I can say that, the main reason is in fact the Euro-Atlanticism of the left, because since she took a pro-Ukraine, anti-Russian position in 2023, the trade union leadership has made peace with her. Everybody knew that the cost crisis in 2023 was a product or a byproduct, particularly of the energy crisis from the Ukraine war. But the trade union tops made a real pact with Meloni not to go against her on that, because they both supported NATO in the Ukraine against Russia.
It's pretty rotten.
Yeah. That's very rotten. So now this situation is a little bit of a break in that social peace with Meloni, and a good thing. But some of the groups, for instance, the Italian section of the Revolutionary Communist International, called Partito Comunista Rivoluzionario, they have an article recently that says a dam is collapsed, meaning now all the possibilities are open to the working class. Right. And as I said, it's true that there has been like a lead that's been removed, but it's not the case that this has already pervaded the entirety of the working class, and not to see that.
I think this is kind of what's key, which is to take account of the obstacles and recognize that there are things that communists need to fight to overcome, which are going to hold back the struggle from really being what it could be. But by not actually even recognizing them, and just saying, oh, the floodgates are open, the dam is open. It's a very classic RCI thing. Every time they see a movement, they think a revolution has opened up. But, they never really discuss what's holding the anger back of the masses.
Yeah, it's also a way, very handy in some cases, to make peace with the existing trade union bureaucracy.
Yes. Of course.
Because you can appear to be very radical. For instance, they have been calling for a general strike, meaning, a prolonged strike that really, and that's not on the cards at the moment. A strike for Palestine, up to one-day strike, may have some success on Friday. I hope it has a large success. But from what we are seeing, this divide in the working class has not been overcome in 3 days or 1 week. Okay, there have been layers that have moved, but it's still there. And so to call for a general strike just means on playing, without, as you said, trying to overcome the obstacles that the history of the left has built for 10, 30 years, is a way of, being not fighting the trade union bureaucrats. And I have examples from my workplace. I won't go into that because it's a bit in the detail. Because we are having a sort of a united front with people from the PCR in my union. We are working together in order for our union to join in the strike. Nice. Yeah, but at least the guy I've been working with is quite constantly trying to be soft on liberalism, because they don't fight it in their party frontally. Meaning, for instance, illusions in the EU, particularly, or illusions in the ethics of the capitalists. They do condemn it, from time to time, but it's not like they make it a core fight. And so their people tend to capitulate to it when, especially other leftists, raise it strongly. They become all of a sudden very emotional, and partial to this. Disarmed.
Yes. I understand. Just to bring it back so we've got the general strike coming up on Friday. You raise 3 slogans in the leaflet which you publish, right? Obviously, defending the flotilla. That's key. I wonder if you could just talk very briefly about the other 2. I think the other one also makes sense, which is Sink Meloni and who's the other guy? Salvini.
Salvini is the Northern League vice. Leader.
Yes, okay. So that makes sense. Oppose the government, defend the flotilla, and then you raise the other one, free Palestine. And of course, part of that means defending the people who've been gone after inside Italy, right? All the repression that has happened.
Yeah, that's one of the points that we make in the tasks that are at hand now for the workers' movement. One is, of course, to support and try to build really the strike after this. Now that the flotilla has been stopped, the strike is going to be on Friday. We want it to be strong and to be the strongest hit against the government possible. And then going forward, it's really needed to build a workers' embargo against Israel, meaning stopping those weapons. And that's very possible because, workers seeing trains passing by with missiles on top of them don't want to work on those trains. Workers seeing ships with armored cars and tanks don't want to work on them. So it's really very concrete and easily to do, honestly, for the unions. And the third one is to defend everybody who's been repressed for its support to Palestine. Actually, the USB union has set up a strike fund, not a strike fund, a defense fund for those workers who have been singled out by the bosses for supporting Palestine. That's a very important attempt that they are making, I believe. There have been unionists in the airports, for instance, that have been singled out by their companies for leaking news about weapons passing in the airport or similar things that really need to be defended, because I think there has been a witch hunt against a protester in Milan on last Monday who wanted to storm the central station and stop the train. Okay. Of course, the train were still working because the union had not called for a strike inside there. That would have been the easiest and more economic way to stop the trains. But since this did not happen, students and leftists and workers wanted to go there and stop these trains, and the police attacked them very violently. And so the government, we chanted them, and the Democratic Party also joined in the campaign by saying, "Oh, we are for Palestine, but not for violence." But really, workers need to understand that if you are seriously trying to stop weapons to Israel and to disrupt the government to support Palestine, we are going to meet this kind of repression. So if we don't defend our co-workers and our parts of our movements that are targeted, we are not going anywhere.
Yeah. But also, I mean, for me, what that highlights is how the strategy of the union leaders to not shut down all workplaces is really actually opening up the more militant left-wing student and worker elements to repression, right? Because they wouldn't need to do that if the strike was actually carried out properly. So this struggle to defend those who've been gone after, to fight for Palestine, it's really linked to fighting for a different leadership of the unions, one that, doesn't suck up to the EU and all of that stuff. And, that really actually is fighting for the interests of the working class and the oppressed. So I think the way you explain it makes it very, very concrete. So thank you for that. Also, if I could ask you, I would like to link in the show notes the way to donate to the defense fund for
I will send you
union.
That would be nice. Instagram or link.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I found this very educational and informative, especially I think the broader history of the country that you painted in terms of your Atlanticism and so on. Is there anything else that you wanted to add before we wrap up?
Okay, I think this is as I said, there has been 2 years of total inertia by the trade union tops facing the government. And this is building up on 30 years of total inertia on not fighting the liberal order. So this is a very small opportunity, but a very concrete opportunity for the working class to change the situation a little bit. That could be a very concrete step to get in a defensive position for the future, because we are going to get a defensive situation and everybody knows about that. And in my union, I can see it because we have been activating a little layer of people who want to fight the bureaucracy. They have their own problems and differences, but understand that this is a very bad moment and that we can maybe shape up the unions a little bit and to be in a position to fight for other things that are not simply Palestine. It can be a starting point. The strike maybe is not going to topple the government for sure. One strike is not going to stop the genocide in Gaza. Maybe it can inspire other workers in other nations. Actually, I forgot to tell you one thing which is significant. I'm sorry. There was a meeting we went to in Geneva of Port Workers Union in Europe, organized by the USB. The main force there was the Greek Workers Port Union, led by the Communist Party, and in ADEP, I may be wrong with the name. There were unions from the Basque Country, Slovenia, the CGT in France, and others. And they came out with a common statement to work together to block weapons and support Palestine. Of course, it was still a bit vague because then all these people want to go back to their countries and make their own, keep their doors open. Yeah. A struggle union by port workers in the Mediterranean will have a real impact on the outcome of the Palestine struggle, or at least encourage other. And there has been cases in Morocco, as you know, I think, other Arab countries of workers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point is that this is a good development, a huge potential, but really, to make them successful, to make them bring the most pressure possible on the imperialists and on the Zionists, they really have to be led in a way that shuts
Yeah.
everything down and links, crucially, as you've been insisting, links the struggles of those domestic workers in those countries to the fight for Palestinian liberation. Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for helping us to understand everything that's going on in Italy. I will get in touch following the general strike and see if there's anything worth reporting, and maybe we can talk about that more.
Yeah.
Good luck with the strike that's happening in 2 days' time, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much for coming to take the time. Thank you.
Bye.